Welcome to G-Man Gaming and Reviews. Today's video is going to be a reaction video to an awesome video that I watched by Heaps Good called Which Live Action Punisher is the Most Accurate. I absolutely love this video, so I thought I would do a reaction to it because it's got a lot of good... It's stuff that I'm familiar with. So it's basically a video that talks about which live action Punisher is the most accurate. So there have currently been 4 depictions. There's Dolph Lundgren's movie that was released in the 80s, which was the first. Then you have Thomas Jane's version in 2004. The Punisher Warzone with Ray Stevenson in, I think it was 2008. And then we've got Jon Bernthal's portrayal in the what was Netflix and now the Disney Plus series of The Punisher. So it's going to cover which of these particular Punisher adaptations, these 4, are the most accurate. So I'm going to give my comments on that because the Punisher is absolutely my favorite character. Just edges out over Batman. I absolutely love the Punisher. So we're going to talk about this because I think movies don't always do the right justice when it comes to a portrayal, because sometimes they're trying to be movies and they're trying to include elements that you would find in a regular action movie that aren't really very particular or consistent with the Punisher. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So you'll see the description to the original video in the description in the links in the video below, the links below. So let's get started.
Arguably the toughest man in the Marvel Universe, Frank Castle has had 4 live-action iterations, each being a product of their generation. We have an 80s action schlock, a gritty crime drama, a brutal violent pulp, and a long-form psychological realism piece that was built for a streaming platform. With 4 very different representations, showcasing 4 very different elements of the Punisher, each representation is also reflecting a different era of filmmaking. Given how different these portrayals are, surely there has to be one that reigns supreme, one that punishes harder. Let's begin by defining who the Punisher is as a character. Frank Castle is one of Marvel's most stubborn anti-heroes, in both real-world longevity and in-canon personality. Unlike his peers, if you want to call them that, within the heroing world who fight for justice, truth, or any other noble cause, Frank fights for something much darker: punishment. Frank Castle doesn't believe in redemption, mercy, or second chances. He is a force of nature. He is inevitable. Criminals aren't to be rehabilitated, they are to be eradicated. The Punisher, like most anti-heroes, first appeared as a villain within the pages of 1974's The Amazing Spider-Man issue 129. Originally a gun for hire with a strict moral code of taking out only criminals, this base then informed a rich backstory as the character then gained popularity. See, Frank Castle wasn't always the Punisher. Frank at one point in time was Captain Frank Castle, a brave and decorated Marine serving in the Vietnam War. When he got back, he attempts to readjust to family life, being supported by his wife, Maria, and his 2 children, Lisa and Frank Jr. The Castle family decide to take a trip to Central Park on what should have been a very peaceful family picnic. When the family then witnesses a mob execution, they are then fired upon. This leaves the family riddled with bullets and Frank as the only survivor. He did try to follow the rules. He turned to the justice system, trusting the judge to deliver punishment. All that was delivered upon was corruption, loopholes, and the Castle's killers walking free. If the law wouldn't deliver punishment, Frank would.
And I think this is pivotal to the Punisher's character, which in some of the adaptations isn't really covered. It's the combination of the indifference to the fact of how the character's family was murdered, that they really were just killed as if they were insects that were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's that same indifference that the Punisher kills criminals with, which I think is pivotal to making the Punisher, which is where in the video Heaps Good will talk about the specific adaptations and why some of them fail. Because they fail to get this part down, because this part is pivotal to understanding why the Punisher operates the way that he does, why he has an indifferent attitude towards crime, where he has a strict moral code, But if you're a criminal, he's going to kill you without thinking about it, because that's the exact same way that his family was executed, right? And this is where a lot of the live action adaptations fail, which we'll talk about in a tick.
From here forward, Frank Castle became something darker. He was no longer a husband or even a man. He was a soldier in an endless war, a force of vengeance with no endgame. Frank's story isn't just brutality, it's tragedy. His war will never end. No matter how many criminals he kills, there will always be more. He cannot win this war, and Frank knows this. Compare him to characters like Batman, who lost his parents and then went on to build a new family. Frank rejects any chance at moving on. He also had opportunities to find peace, but he refuses them all. Because unlike heroes who strive to make the world better, Frank doesn't believe in a better world. He believes only in punishment. So from this basis, what makes a good representation of the Punisher? Number 1, he is defined by his origin. Frank is not just motivated by revenge, however. Sure, it's what started his journey, but he is a wildfire that refuses to be suppressed. He has a complete severance from a normal life. He will not stop. Number 2, his strict moral code. If you hurt the innocent, you deserve death. He has no tolerance for crime or corruption. However, he will absolutely not stand harming the innocent. His violence is targeted and purposeful, bringing us to our next criteria, number 3. He is a highly trained US Marine and Special Forces operative with skills in urban warfare, marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and demolitions. In a universe where he regularly needs to compete with superhumans, the Punisher is inhumanly focused and gifted when it comes to taking out his target. And lastly, his endless war and isolation. His war cannot be won, only fought. He has no teams, no sidekicks, and no allies. Even his relationships, like that with the Thunderbolts, Daredevil, or even Microchip, are strained and temporary.
I think that's one of the reasons that makes the Punisher such an interesting character. It's all of that combined, but I think that's one of the reasons where some of the live action adaptations fail, where the Punisher is highly skilled, but he's also very tactical and methodical in the way that he operates, right? He's very detached, right? He does have a strict moral code, but when it comes to like anybody who hurts innocents, he doesn't have an ego when it comes to taking him out. He's not trying to prove himself. He's just like a soldier getting the job done. And as a result of that, I think that's where some of the adaptations fail, because they don't. It's the combination of they don't get the origin story right, and they don't. Their portrayal of of the character just doesn't feel like it's consistent with the comic book, which is the comic book has been around for absolutely ages, so it makes sense that it's all about getting the character right. And as you'll see later on, there are most of the adaptations are actually really good. They're just not necessarily good as a Punisher movie. Very similar to like Sylvester Stallone's adaptation of Dredd. The one that came afterwards with I can't remember the actor's name, was a much better, closer adaptation to the story than Sylvester Stallone's Dredd was. Judge Dredd.
Let's take this criteria and look at our first live-action version of The Punisher, Dolph Lundgren's 1989 film, The Punisher. Now, I love Lundgren as an actor. It's hard to launch the following criticisms of the film knowing how much this man has pioneered his genre of film, but I will be honest, I'm not a fan of this movie. Yes, there's some brutal action scenes. Yes, his family are killed off at the start, and the movie reminds you of this pretty much adequately, but it's just so generic. For one, his family death was an intentional mob hit that was designed to take out Frank Castle as he was an undercover police detective. So we're already messing with a perfect origin. He also doesn't wear the classic Punisher skull, and overall the character doesn't have the same moral code as the Punisher we know and love. He actually teams...
I think he's gonna say that he teams up with a criminal, and it's like, I think the movie, the 80s movie, it gets it wrong in that because it's a targeted hit, it's not really indifferent, which is that comic book story of his family just being killed because of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and being taken out so indifferently by the mobsters is like, it's the origin of the Punisher. Whereas this is a targeted hit. So what they did was, like, we're always going to be grateful for Dolph Lundgren for making the first live action adaptation of the Punisher. But is it a Punisher movie? Is it accurate? Not even close. And also, some of the facial expressions that Dolph Lundgren tries to make as the Punisher in that movie are just so over the top. And I think that's where you will talk about the facial expressions, where there's one actor who got the Punisher's facial expression so accurate, which we'll talk about later on. Just that sort of grim, emotionless demeanor, whereas Dolph Lundgren's character is trying too hard to portray a character like that, which is why it doesn't come across as genuine.
Teams up with Franco, the mob boss who ordered the hit on his family to take out the Yakuza. Yes, he promises that Franco will die after they take out the Yakuza, and he delivers that promise, but comic book Frank would just kill Franco the second they met eyes. Also, his beef with the Yakuza is weak, and his characterization of hunting gangs does not live up to his comic book influences, making this movie feel unearned. In the end, this character is hardly the Punisher and is just a copy-paste 80s action movie. Next up...
Yeah, that's what I would say about the Dolph Lundgren's adaptation of the Punisher. It's really just an 80s action movie loosely based off the Punisher, like very loosely based.
We have Thomas Jane's 2004 movie, The Punisher. Now, I'm not going to be counting the YouTube short called Dirty Laundry with Thomas Jane in it, purely because it's literally called the Bootleg Universe, and it isn't canon. I still recommend watching it if you got a spare 10 minutes, but Punisher takes way too long to decide to start punishing, so even if I was to look at it, I wouldn't be rating it high either. But I will say it feels more like The Punisher than his actual movie version does. If I was to say anything nice about the 2004 Punisher movie, it would be that the fight with the Russian is pretty fun. Sure, Thomas Jane seems sassy, having a couple moments in the fight where he literally cocks an eyebrow at the Russian, and his fighting style is not as cold or brutal as a Punisher we would like, but it's a fun scene nonetheless. My criticisms of this piece seem to take a page out of Lundgren's book. They change the origin again. Frank is a detective, and the mob organize a hit on his whole family. And by whole family, I mean parents, cousins, kids, everyone. It's almost cartoonish. And from there, it's another revenge film. That's why this doesn't work, because in the comics, Castle's motivations come from a random senseless act of mob violence. This reinforced his war on crime as an ideology, not just personal revenge.
I think that's the weakest part of the 2004 adaptation. In my opinion, it is still a better movie than Dolph Lundgren's portrayal. We're always going to be grateful for Dolph Lundgren for doing the original live-action movie of The Punisher. Thomas Jane's version is closer than Dolph Lundgren's version is. It has some interesting scenes in it. And as if you were to just take Thomas Jane's movie as a movie, it's a good movie. But there's just certain things about it. For instance, the modification of the origin story. You can't really change the story. Like, it doesn't really make, like, it's, you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to gun down the person's entire family. Like, how would they have known in advance? Like, you know what I mean? It's just, it's so over the top and gratuitous that it just becomes a generic movie, sort of based loosely off the Punisher. There's a lot of good, like, the fight with the Russian is actually really good. There's a scene where one of the hitmen, who's a guitarist, also called Harry Heck, I think it is, that's probably one of the best scenes. Like, it's got some good scenes in it. It's got some really good scenes, but is it accurate to the Punisher? Definitely more than Dolph Lundgren's adaptation, but in comparison to what's going to come next, you're going to see that the next movies that are in are much better adaptations. Because they are consistent with the character, the story is consistent. We'll talk about Jon Bernthal's portrayal in a little bit, because it somewhat veers from the story. But strictly speaking about Thomas Jane's adaptation, it's okay in terms of accuracy. But the changing the origin story is just its weakest part. Especially, it's probably the weakest part of that movie.
Frank Castle's war on crime should feel universal, not personal. Well, as not personal as killing someone's family can be, because there's two elements at play here that seem to have been switched around. The act of Frank's family being shot down is meant to feel like a personal loss to the character, committed by an indifferent system of crime and corruption. This scene had to massacre the levels of the Uchiha clan and was also a personal grudge against Frank. There's even a subplot in this movie where Frank tries to gaslight the main villain into thinking his wife is cheating on him with his main henchman. Frank is meant to be a military tactician, not a jealous ex.
Yeah, I remember that scene. When I first watched the movie years ago, I liked the scene, but realistically, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would the Punisher waste his time trying to gaslight the best friend of the criminal when in the comic books he just would have shot them? There's no need to go to this elaborate extent to do something that he could just easily do with his gun. So it's very out of character for the Punisher.
Last bit of criticism I'll launch Tom Jane's way is that his portrayal of the Punisher seems more brooding and passive, rather than an unstoppable war machine. He spends a lot of the time sulking and drinking rather than actually punishing criminals. A lot of his fights are lacking the military discipline and tactful expertise that we need. At least they actually have him wearing the skull shirt in this movie though. Now let's get to the meat of this video.
Yeah, so what I'm going to say is that's also not consistent with the character. The Punisher is dedicated to his crusade against criminals. It's what he lives for, right? He literally, he's decided that he's going to fight criminals for the rest of his life until he dies, right? So he wouldn't be sitting there drinking in his spare time. Right, that's one thing that he wouldn't be doing. He would be preparing to go out and fight more criminals. So, like I said, the facial expressions are pretty decent in terms of Thomas Jane's version. But like I said, it's like Heaps Good said, it's just too brooding and passive. Not really consistent with a character who has made a indifferent universal quest to take out criminals, rather than someone who's operating on a personal revenge story. And I feel that this movie was intended to be just a one-off, especially by the way that it ends. So it sort of cleans up the story, like the way that he kills the character who ordered the hit on his family. But I don't think it was a very accurate portrayal, but it's better than Dolph Lundgren's version.
The only real competition here was between the late great Ray Stevenson's 2008 Punisher Warzone movie and Jon Bernthal's Punisher series. Now, both of these representations are near perfect. It's hard to pick a winner, but if I was to make any argument why this may be an unfair fight, it would be that we have spent so much more time with Bernthal than anyone else. Just to maybe recapture why Ray Stevenson is still in the race, however, let's revisit our points. Both Jon Bernthal and Stevenson have great scenes showcasing their origins. Both were random acts of violence, as we see the classic family death in the park scene when Stevenson's Punisher is visiting his family's grave. Now, I will deduct some points from Bernthal for this, however. Yes, we have the nightmare sequences, which are amazing, and yes, his war started because Castle believed it was random mob violence, which is how the Punisher works best, but it is revealed to both audience and Castle that the mob violence was just a cover-up for an organized hit from Colonel Ray Schoonover and Operation Cerberus leader William Rawlins to deter Captain Frank Castle from exposing their war crimes in the...
Yeah, I think that's the weakest part of Jonathan Bernthal's series, is the fact that they went from it just being about taking out criminals in a different way to becoming about the deep state. Don't get me wrong, Jonathan, I love the fact that there's the Punisher series. I've watched it. I'm watching it again. The second season. Also love Daredevil, by the way. But it's not really consistent with... I get why they did it, because I think the Punisher series was released in 2015 to 2018. And it makes more sense why Disney would have gone in that direction, because... this is the only time I'm going to mention this. With the political correctness, the idea of having him fight against the deep state and war crimes is probably more, I suppose you could say, in vogue than a character who just goes around killing criminals. Because I think that generally leftists believe that criminals are criminals because of poverty, right? And if nobody was poor, there'd be no criminals. So that's possibly why they went after this particular depiction than sticking to the original storyline. I'm not saying that the original storyline is more conservative or not. I'm just pointing out that in the original comic, he has an indifferent war against criminals. He doesn't care what the motivations for why criminals become criminals are. He's not interested in any of that. All he knows is, if you hurt innocents, you're going to die, right? And that may have been a possibility for why they decided to make this character about the deep state. It might have also been because maybe they had some plans for it fitting in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Hydra. Potentially, I don't know. Or it could have been just what I said, but changing from that original sort of depiction of the Punisher's origins sort of does take away from its accuracy towards the Punisher comic books.
The Middle East. In my opinion, this weakens Bernthal's depiction of the Punisher's origin, as now his enemy isn't crime, but it's deep state operations, shady government conspiracies. It definitely muddies the waters. Whereas we have Stevenson right over here. We have that flashback by the grave. Later on, he has an interaction with a child that he saves and his own child's belongings that he has been keeping safe. It's just perfect. Okay, our second point, his strict moral code. Now, I actually enjoy when characters have a plot that does stray from their moral code to a point. We need our characters to go through something that challenges their ethos. To be honest, both characters have had something like this happen. Stevenson accidentally kills a cop who was undercover in a mob sting. Now, it's not like the Punisher likes cops. Actually, in the comics, he is specifically against the cops, going as far to tell a police officer that if he wanted a role model, to look to Captain America and not him. Because if cops did their job, well, there wouldn't be a need for the Punisher. But he also doesn't kill cops unless they're corrupt. Stevenson, after killing his cop, almost hangs up the Punisher mantle. This is a large part of this movie,
and I think this is why Punisher Warzone edges out over Bernthal's portrayal, is this scene right here. Because this scene really reflects the gritty nature of the Punisher's war. That if you were to actually engage in a war against criminals like this, you would have collateral damage. It's inevitable. But the Punisher doesn't think that way. Right, okay, and I think that why this particular scene in this movie is why the Punisher Warzone edges out, because that's what happens if you go around killing criminals. You're occasionally going to kill undercover cops, right? And I don't think when the Punisher started his war on crime that he ever thought that would happen. Now it's happened, and now he has to sort of he has like a moral dilemma of how he's going to move forward. Does he continue deciding to be the Punisher and mowing down criminals now that he's become a criminal himself, because he killed an undercover cop who wasn't innocent? Or does he continue on his war knowing that he's done what he's done? That's a moral dilemma that is consistent with the Punisher story, which is Jonathan Bernthal's version is more Disney-fied. So doesn't really have the same grittiness that you would see in the Punisher Warzone.
turmoil he goes through with this decision. Whereas Bernthal has his discourse with Daredevil and the lawyer gang. We have the classic argument of the rooftop scene, almost directly ripped out of the comics. The only bit that I don't enjoy is that he let the Murdoch lawyers try to get him free, to which he only throws a case so that he can get close to Wilson Fisk in prison. I just don't think Castle would entertain any of this. However, if the argument stopped here, then this win goes to Bernthal, as on paper, the Punisher throwing a court case to get locked up and put near more criminals to punish is a lot more in character than killing an undercover cop. But there is one scene where Stevenson showcases the Punisher's strict moral code that I just don't think we've had all throughout the streaming show's runtime. We have a showdown between the crime family Castle has been hunting the entire movie. We have the detective who's been trying to put Castle behind bars, and the family of the slain cop under siege in their family home. Castle has successfully saved the family. He was literally holding a child in his arms. One of the main henchmen of the crime family is sitting at the dining room table as his peers have escaped, and the detective is about to arrest him. Any other hero would consider this the end of the conflict. The police officer is about to arrest the bad guy, and the innocents have been saved. But that doesn't matter to the Punisher. Without hesitation, as soon as the opportunity arises, he blasts.
And that is... This scene is one of the reasons why Punisher Warzone edges out. Just the indifference to how he kills the criminals. He doesn't even wait for the child to be out of the room. As soon as he gets his opportunity, bang, right? And that's why this, like, the Punisher Warzone is, in my opinion, the most accurate portrayal of a Punisher movie ever. It is my favorite. That doesn't mean I don't want Jonathan Bernthal to keep making TV shows, because I absolutely love him. I love anything to do with the Punisher, but this is the most accurate. Like, this movie just, the Punisher Warzone, it just has it all. You know, the moral dilemma, the indifferent killing of criminals. This is the quintessential Punisher movie.
A giant hole in the unarmed henchman's head with a shotgun. There are children present. The cop that was trying to arrest him is now the leading witness. None of this matters because the Punisher has punished. Now, our third criteria is tactical genius. Looking back to Stevenson's Warzone, this is the most tactical Punisher we have. He is brutal, cold, methodical. There's one scene that I want to point to, that being Castle's assault on Don Casser's party that opens the movie. And I think this is my main issue with Bernthal's Punisher. He doesn't really plan many fights.
Yeah, John, this is one of the reasons why I like the Ray Stevenson's portrayal, is that Ray Stevens' portrayal is very, even in close combat, hand-to-hand combat, he's very methodical and tactical, whereas Jon Bernthal's portrayal is more like of a brawler. Especially in that scene in season 2, where he gets shot in the leg, and instead of trying to take cover or anything like that, he just rushes towards the guy who's got the gun. He comes across as, like, in a lot of his fights, he always ends up being bloodied with blood coming from his nose and stuff like that, whereas, you know, Ray Stevenson's portrayal is like, you know what I mean, it's less hoorah and more tactical and cold in his disposition and his combat methods, whereas Jon Bernthal is just all aggression. So that's really the difference between the two, and that's why I think Ray Stevenson's portrayal in terms of combat is more accurate. But Jonathan Bernthal's portrayal, I think in some cases, Thomas Jane's version might be a little, like, if I had to rate them in terms of, like, combat, it would probably be Dolph Lundgren's at the lowest, Thomas Jane is next, Jon Bernthal. Actually, I would maybe even rate Thomas Jane's version in terms of combat higher than Jonathan Bernthal's version, just simply put, because in Thomas Jane's version, there's still a little bit more tactical nature to the way that he fights. Ray Stevenson's version is so it's hard to say. This is the thing. The Ray Stevenson's version is the most accurate. Whether or not it's the most likable version is another story entirely. But Thomas Jane's version is more accurate than Jonathan Bernthal's version, in my opinion. But then Ray Stevenson's at the top. Like I said, Jon Bernthal's version comes across as a jarhead brawler, rather than a tactical, detached, cold, grim, methodical killer.
The sniper shot across country lines at the start of episode 1, season 1 of The Punisher, and a couple of the skirmishes he has in the second season of Daredevil. But come on, compared to that of Punisher Warzone, we have Stevenson plan an assault with multiple siege tactics. Yes, it's over the top. There was absolutely no need for him to hang upside down from that chandelier, but this is also the same guy who regularly fights Spider-Man. And that's what I want to see. Superhuman effort in killing a mob family. Bernthal mainly just shouts, runs in guns blazing, engaging in some crazy cool hand-to-hand, but there is no planning to 90% of what he does. Some of his best fights, like the prison scene, are in self-defense. And as it is a streaming show, the slow pace of Bernthal's world just makes it feel like a crime drama at times. We want something over the top, gritty, and hyper-violent. My last point on my list is his isolation, his endless war. Now, they both have allies.
One thing that I will point out that's not covered in this, because it's only talking about live action Punisher versions, is the game that came out. I can't remember if it was on PlayStation 1. That was actually a really good game. And that was even more gritty than any of the stories it was so gritty at the time that when it came out, like there was a politicians going after it, if I recall. And he's going to talk about his endless war in isolation now. I think this is where Ray Stevenson's character edges out, because it's not just the grim it's the grim demeanor. Like there's even a scene in Ray Stevenson's movie where he says that he can't win, and that he's got I'm paraphrasing here, and that he's going to keep doing it until he gets too slow and he dies, right? But it's the endless war and his grim demeanor and the facial expressions that Ray Stevenson makes that really capture the Punisher, which is why I think Ray Stevenson's depiction is the most accurate.
But by the end of Warzone, Castle's only real allies is his strenuous relationship with the police. Bernthal's Castle has allies everywhere. He isn't so much isolated as he is just a loner, and yes, there is a distinction. Even when Stevenson's Punisher is getting along with other characters, he really isn't. The way Stevenson plays his isolation is just so much more effective than Bernthal's. The Punisher should look like he's about to clock you at any given moment, and Stevenson somehow balances this while still looking like he's on the verge of tears. He carries his pain with him at all times and this look behind his eyes, while balancing a rigid intimidation to all around him, just reminding the audience that his fuel still is burning hot. He won't stop. He is still in pain. He is fighting his one-man war at all times. Bernthal has moments of respite.
I think that was like the best part of Ray Stevenson's depiction. There's a lot of good parts of it, but the fact that he has this grim, menacing demeanor while at the same time looking like he's haunted, I think perfectly captured the Punisher. I think Jonathan Bernthal's portrayal is more, I wouldn't say accurate, but it more feels like somebody who is going through psychological drama as the main part of that character, rather than a cold, methodical killer, which is what the Punisher is. But obviously at the same time he's traumatized by what happened to him. So yeah, like I said, Jonathan Bernthal's version is still really good. Like, I'm really happy that it's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I hope to see more Jon Bernthal as the Punisher. But yeah, like I said, Ray Stevenson's acting, he just hit the nail right on the head. Like, I don't think you could make a more accurate portrayal than the Punisher Warzone.
He's being moody in an apartment, or he is on the run and pretending to do his best as a wrecker, or chatting up a girl at a bar. Stevenson looks like his family got gunned down yesterday at all times. His isolation is pure and honest. He wouldn't be seen dead moving on with his life in any way, and I swear Bernthal just starts every season like that. If you still aren't 100% convinced that Stevenson edges out Bernthal, Punisher Warzone's Jigsaw shits all over Bernthal's Jigsaw. Billy in the Netflix series is still hot, even with the scars. Warzone's Jigsaw is grotesque.
Yeah, actually, that's probably one of the other good points is the Jigsaw character. Like, I don't even know why Disney gave the character, like the Jigsaw character in the Netflix series. They just gave him a few scars, and that's I can't believe that they actually thought that would fly, especially because in season one of The Punisher, he's literally slamming Jigsaw's head into a mirror over and over again. And so and his face is absolutely bloody, to have ended up with a little bit of scars. And to have the character called I don't even know, like, I don't know if they were just trying to save money, but yeah, the depiction of Jigsaw in the Netflix series is like not even close.
And while we're talking about looks, Stevenson just looks more like the Punisher. Again, Bernthal is just too hot. Yes, his nose looks to be broken, and yeah, for sure he looks like a brawler, but the Punisher needs to look like a war dog, just beating the shit at all times. A little bit ugly, to be honest, and Stevenson looks ripped straight out of the comics.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. I mean, it doesn't, like, I don't know, it's like Stevenson was born to play the part in the Punisher Warzone. Like, he was born to play, like, not just the structure of his face, like his expression, he's got it down so well. That sort of grim look to him where he's just taking people out and he's looking like he's just having a walk in the park almost. Like, you know, he's just indifferent. Like, that's just a criminal. I'm going to kill them. That's that. But it captures like that story of the origin story really captures how he came to be that way. How he decided that the system failed and he's going to make it right. Well, he's not going to make it right, but he's going to do what the system intended, what should have done, which was to punish the criminals.
In the end, it is two amazing portrayals, but if we're asking ourselves which is the more brutal, more honest to the comics, and just a fun ride, I've got to give it to Stevenson. But hey, Bernthal has the opportunity to do something that no other Punisher has had the chance to do before. He can play in the Marvel Cinematic Sandbox. Some of the coolest Punisher moments is watching how he clashes with the rest of his verse. Like when there is a wake for the villain Stiltman at the popular villain meeting place, the Bar with No Name, in Punisher War Journal Volume 2, Issue 4. Spidey comes by to pay his respects because he genuinely doesn't want his villains to be killed. Wait for Spidey to leave and it's revealed that the Punisher was pretending to be the bartender and just blows everyone up anyway. Another story similar to that of some gun guys taking on the Sentry in the Thunderbolts movie has the Punisher doing the exact same thing, only this time alone, as he tries to assassinate Norman Osborn on a world stage, a god versus a stubborn prick with a gun. Or when he steals War Machine's armor to finally bring peace to the Middle East, only to get in conflict with the entire Avengers lineup after trying to bring that same justice back to American soil against Hydra. This story ends with Castle being arrested and Nick Fury gloating that he won, to which Castle says, 24 prison guards were killed by Hydra and rioting convicts, Ghost escaped, Baron Zemo escaped, the Supreme Commander is still alive, and you consider tonight a win? That is why I am not on your team. And when we get stories like that, I'll concede.
I think, like it says here, I think this is probably going to be the best part of Jonathan Bernthal's adaptation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Similar to, I can't remember the Civil War in the Marvel movies, right? I think Jonathan Bernthal's character is being set up to be that. Which it sort of explains why. Like, there's going to be really good interplay and drama when they actually have the character clashing with other superheroes, which is going to create a really good juxtaposition for a story, which I think is maybe the angle that they're going down. So, if you're talking about which live action adaptation is the most accurate portrayal of the Punisher in the comic books, it's definitely Ray Stevenson's version. But I am interested in seeing where they go with Jonathan Bernthal's character, because I want the Punisher to be in. Like I said, it's one of my. I think he is my favorite character of all time. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more Punisher stuff. I'm going through the second season of the Punisher series on Disney Plus again. So really excited to watch that again. So let's finish up.
Admit that Bernthal has beaten Ray Stevenson's masterpiece, Punisher Warzone. If you want my recommendations for good Punisher reading material, look up any of the following: Jason Aaron's Punisher Max Kingpin from 2009, Matthew Rosenberg's The Punisher Volume issues 218 to 228 from 2016. These are the issues where he's wearing the War Machine armor. Any of Punisher Warzones, either the 1992 version, the 2008 version, or the 2012s, although I do have a soft spot for 2012s. And lastly, any Punisher story written by Garth Ennis. The guy just understands the character. Read those and watch all these movies. They're all worthy of a watch, and come to your own decision.
Okay, so this was my reaction of which live action Punisher is the most accurate. Like I said, I think Ray Stevenson's version edges out. Ray Stevenson's version was came out of nowhere for me. Because I hadn't heard that it had been in production, like I had with the other movies. But when raised with the other adaptations, well, not the live action version in the 80s, I was a kid then. But yeah, but like I said, it is Ray Stevenson's edges out in terms of accuracy. So this was G-Man Gaming and Review's reaction to which live action Punisher is the most accurate. Like I said, the original link will be in the video description. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I'd love to hear your comments on this video, what you'd like me to do a react to next, what you'd like me to do a video on next, and what are your thoughts on which live action Punisher is the most accurate. This was G-Man Gaming and Reviews, signing off.